Hello, my name is Jason, and this is talk number 3 on the topic of de-spiritualization of our society. Last time, I tried to give a couple examples of what I consider to be things we intuit to be true, though there doesn't seem to be any real scientific reason to believe in those things. Now again, I just want to reiterate, I'm not knocking science, and we'll talk about science maybe next time. Today I'm going to talk about science fiction and how it kind of joins science and intuition together. Anyway, I'm not knocking science, but if there is a spirit, science obviously would have nothing to do with it. It wouldn't be able to detect it or study it, and there you go. So, how do we know these things? Well, intuition. That's what I'm going to say, intuition. Now, I'm going to look at some of the science fiction that kind of demonstrates this. I think science fiction, like I said, is often the marriage of science and intuition. Okay? So when we see something that's purely scientific, logical and scientific, it usually ends up disgusting us. I think I alluded to the whole Thanos idea of just, killing half of the population. Even though scientifically, that might actually be the best thing for the species in an increasingly overcrowded or overdeveloped world. That might be the best thing for not just our species, but even for other species. Definitely the best thing for other species, no doubt. But of course, we're not as concerned about other species because, once again, we view mankind as different and unique because we intuit that. So, when we look at science fiction, it often explores the idea of what it means to be human, what separates us from artificial intelligence or aliens or animals or whatever. And to do this, it sometimes performs basically what I would call virtual experiments by putting man into different situations that we can't actually put man into, but we can through experiments, virtual experiments, science fiction. Now, you've probably read or heard or watched lots of science fiction where there's a future where certain principles were put into effect to try to solve man's biggest problems. And the result is very unsatisfying. And it's not that the science was wrong, it's that the science didn't answer all the problems. Now consider this. If man were a purely physical being, then all man's problems are purely physical, and all solutions are scientific. That would be the truth. If man was purely a physical being, there was no spirit, everything about us was physical, then every problem we have is at a physical level. And therefore every solution would be a physical solution to a physical problem, and science would be able to solve everything. Now, some people there's probably lots of people who actually believe this, and they would just say, well, that's true, but we don't have enough scientific knowledge yet. We're still accumulating. We don't know everything. We never claim to know everything. And that's a fair point. But science fiction often tends to imagine, what if we did know all these things, we put this knowledge into use, what would happen? And what usually happens is either one, we find out that the science doesn't work because humans still carry with them something else besides their physical being, right? Generally, this is about good and evil, which I said would be evidence that we have a spirit, because good and evil only exists with free will. And the idea is that if we did all these things and put people in an ideal situation where everything's wonderful, there would still be problems because people would still resort to selfishness, tribalism, and wars and all kinds of things would eventually break out, and we have the exact same problems that we still have because there's something about us that allows us to do evil, just as there's something about us that allows us to do good. The other um, outcome for a lot of science fiction is we put all these things into practice to try to make life better for people, and it works, but it's so disturbing that we find the cure worse than the disease. In other words, it looks like free will has been taken away, perhaps. You'll see some like that. Or have you ever heard of a story where they decide to just make people less emotional and less passionate? People can't listen to music anymore, or they're not allowed to see colors. Does that sound familiar? Or I'm going to take an example because I think it's probably one of the best known science fiction books out there, and that's Brave New World, where we decide at least to solve man's societal problems by getting rid of class struggle, class envy, class warfare, by creating um, classes of people who are content to be in the class they are in. Now, they do this in two different ways. First, through hard science. All, if you remember the story, or the book, all humans are now not born of woman. They are instead manufactured. And they interfere at the embryonic level to make sure that some develop better than others. The ones who develop fully and the best are the alphas. Then they interfere with some embryos so they're not quite as developed, and they're betas. And then you got gammas and deltas, I believe. It goes all the way down to delta. And so they interfere with um, in their embryonic state and in their development to make sure that there are distinctions. The alphas should be taller and better looking and more intelligent. Now, the main character, at least for the first half of the book, because it kind of switches halfway through, Bernard is an alpha intellectually, but something went wrong, and so physically he doesn't really look like much of an alpha, and that means he kind of stands out. And he stands out for other reasons because he kind of questions the society he's in. And this is a common thing in science fiction, right? There's someone who looks around and thinks, yeah, that everyone's happy, but there's something wrong. It's not real happiness. It's just a blasé lack of energy. So no one looks discontent because no one feels very powerfully about anything. It's just kind of bleh. Anyway, and if that were not enough, people are also soft. They also use soft science on the people. So once they've interfered at the embryonic levels, next comes the nursery stage where they're inundated with recordings that brainwash them into loving their own particular station in life. The alphas are very happy to be alphas. The betas are ecstatic to be betas, and so on. And this is something that I think they listened to for quite some time on loop in the nurseries. And just in case all that failed, just in case they weren't content enough because they were designed to be, physically designed to be in a certain class, mentally programmed to like being in that class, if they still didn't find society, if they still struggled with some sort of negative feelings, they could always take a soma pill. Again, a scientific, physical solution to a physical problem, supposedly a physical problem. It must be a brain problem, so take a soma. It'll change your brain chemistry and make you happy. And they advertise soma all the time, reminding you if you're not happy, take some somas, right? I forgot the jingle. There is one, I believe. So the society is created. Let's solve man's problems. Let's just program them. Let's hardwire them, and then also install software in them, basically, that helps them, that makes them all content. But of course, this is one of the examples, as I said, where the cure is worse than the disease. And as you look at the society, it doesn't look human. It doesn't look human. And this is something that you see throughout science fiction a lot. When you solve humans' problems, somehow they don't seem human anymore. because they take away something that makes them human. If you like Clockwork Orange, the idea, in a sense, was to take away free will by programming someone to get violently ill anytime he watched violence. This is to try to keep him from engaging in violence. He would be unable to, and that's the famous scene with his eyes pried open. If you've ever read the book, it's a good book, or if you've seen the movie, it's a great adaptation, by the way. Um, and we see these things, right? You've read all these books or seen these movies where there's something wrong in the future, and that what's wrong is we try to fix ourselves through science. And the reason it doesn't work is because science can only address the physical, and there's something about man that science can't fix because it's not physical. All right? So science fiction kind of explores this idea using lots of science. I think most science fiction writers actually really like science, and most people who read science fiction really like science. And there's nothing wrong with liking science. As I've mentioned, science is our way to understand the physical world. But the reason these things never seem to work implies science can't solve man's problems because man is not merely a physical being. Science can solve a lot of problems, though. It can, and it has, and it continues to do so, and that's good. Again, not bashing science here, but if we have a physical aspect to us, science cannot fix that part. It cannot do anything. It cannot feed that part. So, so science fiction. That's why I said science fiction to me often appears to be the marriage of science and intuition. You take scientific knowledge, you use it to put people into a different situation with better science and scientific solutions, and then you see what happens. Now, of course, they're just simulations of an author's mind, and yet still, that just shows that they're intuiting that this still wouldn't work. It still wouldn't fix things, right? It still wouldn't fix things. And the implication, of course, as I said, is, well, science can only address the physical, but not the spiritual. And so I just wanted to mention that these examples of intuition and show how science fiction often seems to agree with the idea that science can't fix everything about human beings because human beings aren't purely physical, and therefore science can only deal with the physical aspect of human, not the spiritual aspect of what it means to be a human. You can look at other things. You can probably think of your own movies or books you've read. Was it Dark City, where they tuned and aliens experimented on people by switching their memories around? And at the end, the guy says, you were trying to find out what it meant to be human. You were looking in the wrong place. And instead of the head, he was pointing toward his heart. The idea that it's not just our mental capacity. There's something, we say the heart, but of course we don't mean the physical heart. We mean, when we say the heart, in that case, we mean something non-physical. But anyway, you can think of your own science fiction examples of situations where science did not solve man's problems. It's not that the science was necessarily bad. It's that it has its shortcomings. And we'll talk about that next time. We'll talk about the shortcomings of science. Again, not to bash science, but to show that it does have its shortcomings, no matter how much we like it and no matter how useful it has proven to be for us. Right? So I'll see you next time, hopefully.